say this. That game was exhausting. And if you're watching right now, you know exactly what game I'm talking about. As of the time of this recording, the Lions have just lost their second game of the season. How crazy is it to say that on December 16th to the Buffalo Bills in a track meet? And we're going to talk all about it. And not only is it a loss for the Lions, but we'll talk about what it means in regards to how it sets up for them potentially going forward. They are still in position to get the 1 seed in the NFC and still in position to win the NFC North. It is crazy considering the caliber of football that they've played, that this thing isn't like essentially on ice at this point, but we will cross that bridge when we get to it. I do want to start by talking about the game. First off, welcome into the show. Thank you to everybody for jumping in. I'll say this, another week down. This might be a bit of a shorter episode because we had no college football this week. We had one college basketball game. It was Michigan's loss to Arkansas. We'll talk a little bit about that. Some Tigers news as well with Alex Bregman, who, for the love of God, please don't sign tonight because then I got to re-record a heavy chunk of this podcast. He's had weeks to sign. Just give it a few more hours. We'll talk all about that, but let's start with the Lions. You know, I remember when I did my segment, I say I remember as if it was like a long time ago, but when I did my segment about the Michigan-Ohio State game, I remember thinking, you know, this is a good segment. I felt like I did a pretty good job of breaking down what was an incredibly sloppy game, but also, as a Michigan fan, an incredibly rewarding game. And you would think that a game like this, which had 90 combined points between the two teams, that had quarterbacks that were playing out of their minds, it had big plays, you know, it was a fun game to watch. And yet, in terms of my analysis, I feel like it's just very simple. The Lions defense couldn't make a stop. And not only could they not make a stop, but you could tell early on that they were going to have trouble getting a stop. And it reminded me a fair amount of some of the performances that we've seen by Lions defenses in past years. Now, despite this game being a dud, and it was, and there are reasons for it with the injuries, and I'm not saying that, you know, Aaron Glenn deserves to be shipped off here. I mean, I think he's done a very good job with this defense, but there were points last season when early in games you saw the defense really crack and they gave up some big plays and the opposing team sustained some drives and you felt like things were never going to get better. I felt like this season Aaron Glenn has done a significantly better job with his in-game adjustments. But I think what it comes down to is that the Bills at this point in the season are just not a very good matchup for Detroit in the sense that, look, Detroit has had this ridiculous winning streak and they deserve all the credit in the world for it. And a heavy majority of this win streak has come with Aiden Hutchinson being injured. And they'll have to start a new winning streak with him continuing to be injured. No word on whether he'll come back. Some people say NFC Championship. Some people say Super Bowl. We'll talk about that when it happens. But for the most part, the lack of pass rush or the depleted pass rush, it hasn't cost them a game yet because they won 11 in a row. This was not the first time, but it was the first time that a game was lost because you could really feel the absence of Aiden Hutchinson. Now, to Brad Holmes' credit, they went out, they added Zadarius Smith, the deadline. Wonderful player, but Hutch, we're talking about, you know, Anthony Bellino brought it up when I interviewed him for Chris and Company. I mean, it's almost like taking TJ Watt off the Steelers. I mean, he's that much of a game wrecker, that important of a player, the real soul of this defense. And in this game, you had a depleted pass rush that was going up against a quarterback who is masterful, absolutely masterful at getting out of the pocket, extending plays, making ridiculous throws, running the ball, you know, making plays with his legs, and Josh Allen just feasted all game, and the Lions could not stop it. And really, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of an attempt to really do things a ton differently. I was waiting for more blitz packages, but I do understand the fact that that's what makes Josh Allen, similar to Mahomes and similar to Lamar Jackson, so lethal is that, yeah, you could try those blitz packages and you can put your corners in one-on-one coverage, hoping that they can make plays. But Josh Allen in the first half of that game and the entire game was making ridiculous throws. I mean, he is the master of the no, yes play, right? Where he will roll out to the right. He will throw across his body, which you're told never to do as a quarterback, and he'll throw a dart. I said in my post-game video, and I stand by it, the guy's playing the quarterback position at as high a level as anyone can play it right now. I think he's got to be in the driver's seat to win the MVP. I know Saquon's had a remarkable year, but it kind of feels like Josh Allen's time. And as much as I love Jared Goff, and I am going to praise Jared Goff here in a second because he played a fantastic game, that is an element that, for the most part, sans a fluky play here or there, just doesn't exist, is his ability to really get out of the pocket. Now, the Lions have made it work with the offensive line that they have and the weapons that they have, but you can see just how much of a matchup nightmare a guy like Josh Allen is. For what? The guy's hard to tackle. I mean, he's built like a tight end. He's just hard to bring down in general, not to mention the fact the guy's accurate as hell. He's got a rocket of an arm. He's going to marry Haley Steinfeld. Life is very good for Josh Allen right now, and life was very good for the Buffalo Bills on Sunday against the Lions. And even though the Lions scored a ton of points, and they did, I mean, they moved the ball up and down the field. They had a few 3-and-outs early, and they got behind. It reminded me of the Tampa Bay game, where I want to say in that game, Goff threw a ton of passes, right? And Goff played quite well against Buffalo, but let me just check the stats here. Goff threw 59 passes in this game. Now, he completed 38 of them, 494 yards. I'm not going to come on here and complain about a starting quarterback for my team throwing for 495 yards, 5 touchdowns, no turnovers. At the same time, I think we know that's not the identity of this Detroit Lions team. You know, they talk about grit, they talk about toughness, and I know they throw these buzzwords around, but the one thing I've said a million times is, like, you can say a lot of things. The fact that those ideals have actually, like, they followed through on that with this team is pretty remarkable. And they have won games with, you know, you have to worry about the play action pass because of how accurate Goff is. Then a big reason why you have to worry about the play action pass is that if they choose to run, it's dangerous. You have a great offensive line and 2 elite running backs. With them falling behind early, it didn't really give them the opportunity to settle into their game, and I thought it led to some problems. Only 48 rush yards as a team in this game. David Montgomery, 5 carries, 4 yards. I mean, we've seen Montgomery pop off for some huge games in his tenure with Detroit. It seemed like maybe he had a bit of an injury issue as well, hobbling a bit. You did get Jahmyr Gibbs going out of the backfield as a receiver. Now, again, that came with the fact that you were behind for most of the game. You had to pass for most of the game, and you were, trying to come back. And in fairness, they almost did. That they scored to make it a 6-point game late there, and Jake Bates attempted, a hell of an onside kick that they almost got. And with this offense and the miracles that we've seen this season, who knows what would have happened? But in a weird way, and I feel like Lions fans may get very upset at me for this take, I still think that this is the best team in the NFL. I still think that this team will get the 1 seed. Now, if they don't, and they don't win the division, we'll have a different conversation. But I don't think it's healthy to have an insanely long win streak in which you have a few games where you look back on and say, yeah, that probably could have been a loss. I mean, let's be real. The Texans game, that probably could have been and should have been a loss. The second Packers game was a razor-thin margin. I would have had my concerns if this team would have won every game after week 2 going into the postseason, because I would have just felt like they were due for a dud. Maybe that's just like silly fandom talking, but I think in some ways this is an opportunity for them to reset. I don't really have any concerns outside of, well, 2 things. Number one, it was surprising how poorly Aaron Glenn's defense played. Now, of course, you go up against a high-powered offense with arguably the best quarterback in football. You're going to give up some big plays, but the fact that the Lions scored 42 points in this game and were constantly playing from behind, that's obviously concerning. But the second one is the injuries continue to rack up, and it is crazy. I mean, how serious some of these injuries are and how consistent these injuries are. Most of them to the defense. It really is shocking. You had Khalil Dorsey, who had to be carted off with a leg injury. I mean, that looks like it's really serious, and he's probably out for the remainder of the year. You wish him well. And I just think as much as this team has done a great job of just keeping the line moving, next man up, I mean, I could throw all those cliches out there, but it's where, in a weird way, I felt like there was an advantage to playing the 3 games in 11 days, where it's similar to the run the Tigers were on at the end of the season, where it's, you just want to keep playing. Yes, there's circumstances that are really unfortunate, but you kind of want to just keep rolling because the vibes are so good, and they had some time off, and I think that the injuries did affect them, obviously the biggest one being Hutchinson, and that's going to be worrisome for the remainder of the year, because and we know this, but the deeper we get into the season, when I look at the kind of opponent that the Lions are potentially going to be playing in the postseason, that's where it really scares you, because if you're without Aiden Hutchinson in a hypothetical NFC Championship game against the Philadelphia Eagles, I know that there's been discussion about maybe he comes back, but let's say he doesn't play. Hutch is not only a game wrecker in terms of sack and the quarterback, he's incredible in rush defense. You got Saquon Barkley in that offensive line against a D-line that's pretty suspect right now. That's really scary. And I think that they're going to have to really, I hate to give you coach speak here, but you got to check out the film and make adjustments going forward, because you cannot have another defensive performance like that at any point this season, or else, I mean, if it happens in the playoffs, it's going to derail your campaign. I got to say, too, a lot of people were really upset with Dan Campbell's decision to attempt the first onside kick in the fourth quarter, which didn't go well. It was almost returned for a touchdown. And then I think a play later, the Bills threw for a touchdown. So that obviously didn't work. The way it is with Campbell's gambles is the fact that I talked about it last week. He's going to roll the dice. Very often they do work. I wasn't as mad about this one as some other people were, just because I think in Campbell's mind, he just had no faith that the defense could stop anybody. If you could try to steal a possession, go ahead and do it. Did it make a difference in the game? Maybe. Yeah, I mean, they scored a touchdown one play later. But ultimately, when I look at this game and I look at the way the defense performed, they did not play well enough to win this football game. They got gashed consistently. And even though I've been gushing over Josh Allen, who was incredible, they ran the ball really effectively. As well as a team, I'm looking at it right now, 198 rush yards for the Bills. That's 6 yards a pop among 4 different ball carriers. James Cook with over 100 yards rushing. So, yeah, it was just a poor defensive performance. And now, going forward, you kind of look at the bigger picture. It's crazy that they still find themselves like in control of their own destiny, which is good, but having to kind of peek around the corner at what some other teams are doing. The Eagles are having one of the strangest seasons I can remember, because every Eagles fan hates the team. Every Eagles player hates each other, and every fan hates Nick Sirianni. And there were reports like late into last season, early into this season, that he'd lost the locker room and he got there 12-2. Howie Roseman just knows what he's doing, because they consistently assemble a great team, and I keep thinking the sky's going to fall down with them. It's not. It's a wonderful, wonderful roster. They took care of business against the Steelers on Sunday. And then, of course, you have the Minnesota Vikings, who I think are about 6 weeks past due for a loss. I know I've said that about Detroit, where it's like, hey, you pulled some out. You weren't able to get this one against Buffalo, but you look back at a few games that you've won. Maybe a couple of them could have been L's, but because you're a good team, they were able to pull out a few W's. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop with Minnesota. Really good team. They have weapons. They have an excellent play caller, excellent coach, and Kevin O'Connell. This has far and away been Sam Darnold's best season. I mean, that's not really saying much, but he's had a wonderful season. But I still feel like they're more in line with the Vikings team of 2 years ago, which was very successful. They won 13 games, but also flawed and kind of got exposed the deeper the season went. Ultimately, I mean, Daniel Jones got a contract because they lost to the Giants in the playoffs that year. But when you look at the remainder of their schedule, look, the Lions, it sucks that it has to work out this way, because it scares me with the injuries that they have. The Lions have to be in playoff mode for the remainder of the regular season, and that regular season does end with you playing a home game at Ford Field against Minnesota, which will, pending something crazy, likely be for the division, potentially for home field advantage throughout the NFC playoffs. So, yeah, anyone who predicted that this division was going to be a son of a bitch to get through, you deserve your flowers. Because you were right about 3/4 of that. The Bears still stink. But the Bears are bad. But the Bears, I don't know. I feel like I'm really setting myself up for failure, putting my faith in the Bears. Hopefully the Bears can do something incredible on Monday night against Minnesota to create a little bit of cushion for the Lions in that division, because it is wild that a team that just had a 11-game winning streak. Sorry, my tongue is twisted and tied like a twisty tie. Is still having to kind of check over their shoulder. So, yeah, not much else to say about that. Real quick, moving on, I do want to talk about Michigan basketball that played one game last week against Arkansas at Madison Square Garden. A bizarre game of runs in which Michigan was dominating the first half. You ended the first half with them, I think, in a 4-point lead. You come out in the second half, Michigan plays 7 or 8 of the worst minutes of basketball you've seen in the history of the sport. They fall behind by 18, almost come back and win. They end up losing by 2. And what was a really entertaining game in Madison Square Garden. And I think that Arkansas team, I know they've had some early season losses. They fell out of the top 25. I think that team's pretty good. Obviously, Coach Cal is going to recruit his talent there. Who knows what he'll be able to do in the tournament. But consistently, there's very few coaches in the regular season that are as good as Calipari. I'm not a believer in moral victories at all. You either win or you lose. And especially in college basketball, where one bad half or a few bad minutes can derail your entire season in March. I mean, you want to try to win those razor thin games. At the same time, when I assess this Michigan team, I brought it up last week. Their biggest problem is turnovers, right? They try to move at a fast pace. And when they're right, when they are moving at the correct pace and they aren't forcing things, this is a really good offensive team. They run good sets. They set screens. They have two difficult 7-footers that are tough to stop. One guy in Danny Wolf who's just a complete freak. I mean, no disrespect to the Ivy League. How in the world did a player like Danny Wolf fall to Yale? A guy with that, a 7-footer that can shoot threes and create off the dribble like no major school wanted this guy out of high school. I find that hard to believe. So you can see when they give themselves opportunities that this is a good offensive team. It wasn't as drastic against Arkansas, but against Iowa in the game that they won that game by 2. Roddy Gale had the go-ahead field goal late in that ball game. Iowa shot 19 more shots than Michigan in that game. The reason turnovers are so killer, man, is you have a good offensive team. You got to be able to create opportunities for yourself. Slow down. I've talked about it a million times. Now, to the credit of Michigan, and one of the bizarre things about them is that when they get turnovers, they come in bunches. I think in the second half, I'm not even kidding you, I think they had like 7 possessions where they had 6 turnovers. It was ridiculous. But then they settled down. They started playing good basketball again. And you come away from it saying, man, this is a talented team. It's a deep team, though I do think over the last few games, we've seen some guys' minutes start to get cut down, like Fat Brooks isn't even in the rotation anymore. We'll see what happens with Pippen. I think early on in the year, we were seeing Dusty go 10, 11 deep. Now it's probably going to be more like 7 or 8 deep, which is very understandable. But when I look at a team like Michigan, who has one big problem, and that problem being turnovers, as far as problems go, I feel like that's a pretty good one to have. Because, last season, how many issues did they have? But I'll just pick one. Last season, they couldn't really shoot the ball. If you can't shoot the ball, that's going to last all season. That's not really a fixable problem. Maybe it's fixable in the offseason. You go get some guys in the portal that can shoot threes, but if that's an issue that plagues you from day one, it's probably going to plague you for the remainder of the year, sans a few kind of fluky games in which you get hot. We see it all the time. Michigan State last year had a year in which their question mark was the big men, and they tried Monty Sissoko and they tried Xavier Booker, and it never really got figured out. That entire season, they were beat up on the glass against superior opponents. They never really had that post presence down low. Seems like they're starting to have it this year. Listen to last week's show if you want to hear me talk a little bit more about that. But with Michigan's biggest problem being turnovers, that to me, that's a correctable issue. Now, it's not easy to correct, and we've seen it burn them a few times already, but I try to jump to a glass half full conclusion with this team, which is bizarre coming from the resident pessimist over here. But what happens if they fix the turnover problem? What kind of team are we looking at? We're looking at a team with some length. We're looking at a team with depth. We're looking at a team with shooters. We're looking at a team, to me, that seems like they are all on the same page. And I know that it'd be very easy to say it's night and day compared to where it was with Juwan, and it is, but more so, you get the impression these guys are all in with Dusty, and they communicate, they switch on defense. There's not the defensive breakdowns that we've seen over the last several years. If you can figure out a way to limit the one Achilles heel that you have, you can be a team that nobody's going to want to play in March. And I feel like I'm jumping to a crazy conclusion by having that conclusion, because we are talking about a team that won 8 games a year ago, but we're not. It's basically a different school. I mean, it's a completely different roster. It's a new coach. It's a new culture. So much has changed. So you can't even really compare it to where they were last year or even the year before. It's a completely new team. So obviously disappointed with the Arkansas loss, but a very entertaining game nonetheless. And I think there's a lot of positives for this team. Now they have another huge game coming up. They got the Porter Moser Oklahoma Sooners this week. They are undefeated. They are in the top 25. Porter Moser, if that name sounds familiar, was the head coach for Chicago Loyola during a few of their NCAA tournament runs, including the 2018 run to the Final Four where they lost to Michigan. The guy knows what he's doing. He did a wonderful job at Chicago. It seems like he's doing a solid job at Oklahoma. Michigan's non-conference schedule and schedule up to this point, I think, has been very fair. You've had your tough games, you've had your cakewalks. I don't think this team's gotten beaten into submission. They're going to have a long layoff, they've had a long layoff between the Arkansas and Oklahoma games. So it'll be a big moment for them. I really hope that they show up and that they can pull out a victory and bounce back from that Arkansas loss, because I do think there's a lot of good things going for this team right now, despite the fact that they came up short against Pig Suey. All right, so I want to end with a little bit of baseball news, and dear God, like I said at the beginning, I hope that this isn't dated by the time we upload this episode, but there have been whispers and rumors beyond just the Twitter sphere from semi-reliable sources about the Tigers being in on Alex Bregman, third baseman. It looks like formerly for the Houston Astros, because it seems like Houston has started to pivot. There's rumors about them trading for Nolan Arenado. They just traded for Isaac Paredes, traded Kyle Tucker to get Isaac Paredes and a few other pieces. So it seems like they are looking for life AB. That's after Bregman, for those of you that don't understand the acronym. But there have been talks for a while about the Tigers potentially making a push at Bregman, just because it makes sense. I mean, whether you know or trust Chris Ilitch or not, I think third base is a void for this baseball team. You're likely at this point coming into next season with Matt Vierling and Jace Young probably platooning in that spot. With Bregman, you get a guaranteed bat for an offense that desperately needs one. He's a wonderful Gold Glove caliber fielder at third base. Is he putting up the power numbers that he was in 2018, 2019? No, he's 30 years old. But the whole thing is, when I look at Alex Bregman and what he could bring to this team next year, it changes the team. Like, the fact is, and Harris has talked about it, he was very open about it from the beginning, we need to add bats. Ham sandwich. I love it, Scott. You are on the right track. Add bats. And it is December 16th, and you've added Alex Cobb. That is concerning to me, because I think a big problem that this organization suffers from and has suffered from over the last 10 years is that they like to stand in the box and watch pitches go by, and then they complain when they strike out. With each passing day, each passing week, each passing month, more and more free agents that could have been yours are going to other teams. Now, I understand. There's certain situations where, while you probably have, not probably, you have the financial ability to pull a Juan Soto, it's a different operation. Chris Ilitch ain't Steve Cohen. That's disappointing, but I get it. But if we get to the end of this offseason, and the best they've added is like I don't even know, man, a Yandy Diaz in a trade or a Paul Goldschmidt, I'm telling you, man, that is a really tough sell. That's a really, really tough sell, because I know so many people who kind of felt reinvigorated with the sport of baseball because of the run that the Tigers had last year. And those players and AJ, they deserve a ton of credit for that. They went out and took it. When nobody believed in them, they had an incredible run. But when I get asked about the Tigers, the number one thing I'm asked about is, are they going to spend? And for the casual fan, and I am not the casual fan, I'm the guy who stays up for game 144 against the Mariners on the West Coast, okay? In a lot of ways, I'm not the target audience, because, like, I could walk into Comerica Park, somebody could shoot me, and I'd probably still watch the next game. Like, it doesn't, I love this team, right? But I think there are a lot of fans over the last 7-8 years that have felt very isolated by the fact that it often feels as though ownership and management isn't trying. And while there's not necessarily a correlation between spending a ton of money and trying, I mean, there's teams that spend money recklessly, there's teams that don't spend money and win. Having been around here my entire life, and having been around here when this was a team that had a top 5 payroll and went out and got the Prince Fielders and Miguel Cabreras and the Justin Verlanders of the world, I think what fans want is a Pudge Rodriguez moment. And I kind of don't even like going back to that, because Pudge was signed in such a different era of the sport. But I guess for the layman out there who might not know, which, oh my God, I feel old if you don't remember, the Tigers lost 119 games in 2003. They were, prior to the Chicago White Sox, I mean, arguably the worst team ever. I know the expansion Mets beat them out, but they were a terrible, terrible team. And Pudge Rodriguez, who had been an MVP, he's in the Hall of Fame now, amazing catcher, had just won a world championship with at the time Florida Marlins in 2003. Dave Dombrowski and Mike Ilitch went out and they signed him. And he had some remarkable years in Detroit. And even 2004, in a year in which they won 70-something games, he was the lone bright spot for them. And people, that was the first moment, and it took a while, took a few years to get to the postseason, but that was really the moment when people are like, man, okay, maybe things are going to be a little bit different with this ownership and with this GM. And while last season was a ton of fun, and you saw the development of a lot of good young players, and you have the best pitcher in baseball, I mean, what a luxury to have, right? There are a lot of people that are just waiting for the Jeff Passan tweet, Tigers have signed X player to a big contract. And look, I think Alex Bregman's probably going to be asking for 6 or 7 years. Do I think Alex Bregman's going to be playing elite third base and hitting 25 to 30 home runs a year when he's 36, 37? No, I don't. But this is where I get very upset because I don't want people to pussy out because of the fact that the Zimmerman contract didn't work and the Javi Baez contract didn't work. Most contracts in baseball are pretty stupid. They are. Juan Soto, who I adore, is going to be getting paid $800 million, being paid until he's 41 years old. I think Juan Soto is probably the best left-handed hitter that baseball has seen since Barry Bonds. I don't think he's going to be hitting 40 bombs when he's 40, okay? If you want an example of this, look what happened to Miguel Cabrera. He was a negative WAR player over his last 6 years. 17, yeah, it's a lot of seasons. It's more than half his contract, right? But we still love him. And I think most Detroit fans would have still signed that contract because we didn't want to see the best player in baseball leave us, okay? The problem is when a big contract is signed, and when we talk about the idea of the Tigers signing somebody to a big contract, it's often very narrow-minded as it's only a pass or fail based on whether this player passes or fails. And it's not. You know, it's a team game. The Angels had Trout and Ohtani in their primes and didn't win shit, right? Ohtani leaves and immediately wins a championship. You know why? Because he went to a team that actually knows how to assemble a roster. I bring all of this up because I don't want the fans to be too gun-shy about the idea of, oh, man, if he's 37, we're going to be overpaying him. Man, dude, 7 years from now, I might not even be here. Like, who the meteor could hit the earth, okay? And when you look across baseball at a lot of big contracts, there's a ton of them that on paper you look at and say, God, that guy stunk. He didn't earn his money. But when you look at the team's overall success, you say, you know what, that piece was needed for that team to make that run in a particular season. I will give you the prime example. After the 2018 season, the Washington Nationals signed Patrick Corbin to a 6-year contract. Corbin, a two-time All-Star, I believe, had a very fine career. 6-year deal after 2018. In 5 of those seasons, I'm not kidding you, he was the worst pitcher in baseball. Patrick Corbin was otherworldly terrible. He was god-awful. He was a pitching machine. The only thing that the only advantage was that he was durable. And even then, this guy, he lost 19 games in the season. He had ERAs in the 5 and the 6s. He had one good year, and it was 2019. And in that 2019 season, in Game 7 of the World Series, he came out of the bullpen, pitched 3 scoreless frames, and the Nationals won that game against Houston and won their first and only world championship. Haven't been to the playoffs since. And you know what? That dude got a standing ovation the last time he walked off the mound at Nationals Park. You know why? Because while the contract itself may have been, from a player performance standpoint, a failure, what it meant to the team was a lot more than just the 5 bad years that he had. And the point I'm trying to make is I don't know what Alex Bregman's going to be when he's 35, 36, 37. But I know right now you have a core of players that is in desperate need of a bat, okay? Let's be real. The guy that you thought was going to be the guy, Spencer Torkelson, stinks, okay? Like, maybe he finds it out, maybe he does. He is not where he should be at this point in his career. At this point in his career, we thought he'd be a 35 home run, 100 RBI guy. He's been a negative WAR player through 3 seasons, okay? Meaning that big bopper doesn't exist. Love Riley Green. He's not that guy. Wonderful, wonderful player. He's not a 40 home run guy. He's not a 100 RBI guy. That guy doesn't exist in your organization right now, which means you have to find it. And because your farm system is deep and you want to develop and retain good young players, you're probably not going to do it in the trade market, which means you better pony up for a free agent. It's what it comes down to. And as I'm saying all of this, I am going to end up being monumentally disappointed because Bregman will go to Boston or he'll go to New York and he'll get over $200 million, and I'll have to sit here and pout because, you know, Jace Young's going to get third base reps next year with it. And I like Jace. He's a friend of the program, but I like Alex Bregman more. So I am crossing my fingers, desperately hoping that I am proven wrong, because I think it completely changes not just the way that I view this team. I think it changes the way that a lot of casual fans will view this organization if you throw that uppercut punch. Because we as fans believe again, but we want to root for ownership that believes again. You know, we can put all our faith in this team, but if you have a front office, if you have ownership that doesn't buy in, you know, unless you go 38-11 again, it's going to be hard to get people to the park, straight up. And I still have my optimism about the future, but I think I've been very fair. Just sign one player. This is the free agency equivalent of the time Sarah Palin couldn't name a paper. Like, just one guy. Okay, throw out the New York Times. It's okay. You don't have to name every paper. You don't have to go out and get every free agent. Just one guy on a 6-7 year deal. What's going to happen? Somebody going to explode? I might, but, noble sacrifice. Okay. That'll do it for today's episode. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let's get those watch hours up. You can check out the shorts that we post on YouTube Shorts, on TikTok, on Instagram. If you could find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, rate us, review us, let us all know what you think. I believe we're going to have a Chris coming in this week, still trying to find a guest. So here's the schedule for the people that are still paying attention. So I'll say this today, which is if you're listening to this, the day it premieres is December 16th. Want to try to have a Chris and Company this week. Want to try to have a Chris and Company next week. And then we are going to be off, at least in terms of podcast, until the new year. It would be a little bit different if it was like it was last year and Michigan was playing in the Rose Bowl or in the playoff, but that's obviously not the case. I don't feel like I'm betraying my audience by missing the ReliaQuest poll, to be completely honest with you. Maybe that makes me a bad content creator, but I'm not going to call myself exhausted, but I will call myself a little bit discouraged. And what's going to happen is we're going to get to the end. We're going to finish this year strong with podcasts and content. And we're going to try to come back with some really good stuff in 2025. But, I could come on here and say we're trying, and we are, obviously. But, and Austin, if you're watching this, I love you. Don't get discouraged. It's just these are the ruts that I get myself into sometimes. Hopefully something good comes of this. But either way, whether you've made it to the end of this or not, I really appreciate all the support that you guys have shown us throughout this entire process. I'm really excited for 2024 to be over, and sans a Tigers run in a Michigan football national championship, I pray to God I never have another year like this. Just straight up. But at least we're healthy, at least we're safe. That's a lot of ways what matters. Talk to you guys real soon. Have a good rest of your day. Peace and happiness.